For Global Business Update, Michael Wilson joins us now from London. Good morning, Michael.
Good morning. Asia Pacific markets a little mixed this morning, basically because the standout feature is the fact that China slightly underwhelmed with its industrial production. It was expected to be about 10.9%. It's worked out about 5.6%. And also retail sales expected to grow by 21% and have only grown by 18.4%. So basically investors are thinking, is this the end of the COVID slowdown and all the rest of it? But China not really performing in the way it was expected to, but again, very early days. Staying with China and the increasing amount of crackdown on technology stocks, on also corporate governance as well. It's confusing overseas investors more and more. Combine that with something I was reporting on last week, which was the reluctance of some Chinese authorities to allow overseas access to economic figures as well. And so all in all, big question marks about foreign investors going in there, even though China is very, very keen to attract foreign investment. It looks like the Turkey election will go to a runoff. Erdogan, the current president, is in the lead, he thinks at the moment, by about 49.54 of the votes, percentage rather. He needs 50% of the votes, and he didn't actually get that. The opposition got about 44%, so it'll go to a runoff, and that'll be on May the 28th. As far as the US is concerned, still the debt ceiling discussions continue. Again, a special meeting today between Joe Biden and 4 congressional leaders. Janet Yellen's warning, which I brought to you last week, and we know only too well that she thinks there'll be a catastrophe unless things are decided. We're sort of looking at a deadline of around about June the 1st. Consumer debit has grown hugely in the United States. It now stands at $17 trillion. Mortgages, not that much. So that debt has grown by $150 billion in the first 3 months of the year. Let's go to the EU now, and it is Microsoft has got approval from the EU, or EC, which is the administrative arm, to actually proceed with its acquisition of Activision Blizzard. As you know, the UK authorities voted against that, at least the competition authorities did, but the EU has passed it, and that's seen as a major victory for Microsoft. G7 taking place in Japan in the next coming days, and what's going on there is Fumio Kishida, who is the Prime Minister there, trying to bring together the G7 in a consolidated agenda for unity against Russia and so on, and against Russian supplies and so on. And he's hoping the Hiroshima will actually see be the breeding ground for G7 leaders to come out with a joint communique supporting their role against Russia. In the UK, now, more and more people are being drawn into the top tax threshold of 40%. This was thought to be only for the richer, but now most people are being, 7.7 million people will be brought into this by 2027, 28. And this includes nurses as well. So basically the freezing on tax threshold, it's called fiscal drag. More people earn slightly more and thus are brought into a higher tax rate. The Prime Minister of the UK, Rishi Sunak, is being accused of not actually lighting the bonfire of EU regulations that he said he would do. He said that his critics say that all he's doing is concentrating on trivial EC laws, and he's seen to be watering down the proposed burning of all these regulations. Again, 600 pieces of EU legislation are to be scrapped, but some of them are so trivial, say his critics, that they don't really count for a great deal. And also the cost of living continues, the cost of living rise continues in the UK. Food leaders will be meeting the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, today to try to see what they can do. It's called the Farm to Fork initiative, and it's somehow somehow trying to increase production of food to keep prices down. The fact is that unfortunately the Suella Braverman, as we were talking yesterday, is still talking about restricting the flow of migration and therefore training people. Well, she wants to train people within this country to pick fruit and so on, and drive lorries as well instead of relying on migration. Oil rally almost happening, but economic problems and economic doubts are still hitting that. And gold, again, it could get into record territory if the debt ceiling talks in the United States don't prove fruitful, but we're getting some sort of positive signs about that. There is a feeling that it must be decided fairly soon, but in that meantime, people are piling into gold. That's the global view.
All right, real quickly, let's talk about this, the new tide in the gaming world. What will this do for Microsoft at a time where most of the tech companies are laying off people?
Well, I have to say, I don't really see what I was amazed that the competition authorities in the UK felt they had to put a spanner in the works, and I don't really see what the difference is as far as the EU is concerned. But what it does is it's being seen by Microsoft as a huge positive. And what they've done is that they want to buy this. They're saying that this satisfies all the antitrust rules that were worried about them buying this piece of software. And the gaming industry is absolutely massive. I suspect this is probably quite good for the future of Microsoft and quite good for the future of the gaming industry as a whole. The really ironic thing that I'm just realizing about this, of course, is that the Competition and Markets Authority in the UK, who are against it, I mean, this is where gaming actually began in this country. But it seems as though the UK authorities don't want it. But nevertheless, this is a major victory for Microsoft.
All right, let me talk about job cuts in the UK, especially as Vodafone has announced that it will be cutting 11,000 jobs in the next 3 years. That's quite concerning because obviously with the state of the economy, what you're looking at is not further job cuts, but even creating more jobs, for the UK economy. What the chief executive, Ms. Stella Vale, has said is that she's focusing more on simplicity and, streamlining their services so that the focus is more on customers. It's quite interesting because would this be perhaps the future or the focus of employers, company owners, CEOs of organizations in the UK, the US, especially as we have been talking about artificial intelligence in recent times, because this has brought up a conversation around job losses, job cuts. Is it really because they want to make things simpler or that they're just not making enough money?
Well, I don't, if a company is not interested in its customers and is not gearing everything towards its customers, then that company is not doing its job properly, is it? I mean, Vodafone is a customer-facing company. Artificial intelligence will no doubt take a lot of those jobs away. But I still hope in my heart of hearts that humans still have a role in all this. And I think they do. I'd prefer to speak to a human being if I've got a problem rather than some concocted artificial intelligence. I'm sure that Vodafone will lay off those kind of people. It'll take a while. They may get mopped up by other tech companies. It's very difficult to say what the framework and the shape of future economies is going to be. I think this will be a long drawn out process nonetheless.
President Biden meets today with House Speaker McCarthy and other congressional leaders. But what happens if their debt limit brinkmanship doesn't produce any concrete result immediately as a result of ideological differences? Analysts have said we face the prospect of global financial chaos if the Americans can't sort out their issues. Why should we be affected by their own crisis? And then as for Turkey, which you talked about, the Sultan of Turkey, Erdogan, looks like, he will win eventually on May 28th, since he has, a comfortable lead, it may appear, with about 2.6 million votes. But I've read one piece by a guy called Owen Matthews, who says that the future of Turkey hangs in the balance, and that future is a perilous future, and that Turkey could become, under Erdogan, a failed state. Is that typical Western rhetoric, or it is a fact?
Well, let's talk about the United States first of all. I feel as though it's so important. This is a normal sort of drama. It doesn't normally go to this kind of thing, but I feel as though congressional leaders and Joe Biden, they're talking relative. There was some very, very small bits of positivity coming out of what was talked about late last week and over the weekend, and it may well be that they will reach agreement. I mean, the feeling amongst the markets is there probably will be agreement, but then, of course, there are still ideological differences which need to be ironed out. As far as Turkey is concerned, the lira, it will suffer. The stock market is already suffering as well. And Turkey is moving towards a more authoritarian kind of society than it was before. If Erdogan gets in, then it will mean that interest rates will continue. He doesn't want to raise them because he doesn't feel as though inflation of 80% is particularly worrying. The problem is, I feel, for him, I'm not sure the 50,000 and the relatives of the 50,000 people who died. I mean, it's a lot of people, 50,000 people, a huge nationwide tragedy for Turkey. And I don't feel as though people are actually truly voting within this. I think there's been a lot of difficulty in getting to voting stations and the rest of it. The infrastructure of the country is still waiting to be put together. And so I do feel as though the future of the country is very much in balance. It's a member of NATO, but it's still opposed to Sweden joining NATO, as you know, we've talked about before. I think the balance of power, the balance of Turkey is essential as far as the EU. It's not a member of the EU, but it borders the EU. And I think some kind of stability in that country is absolutely necessary. Certainly the future hangs in the balance. Of course it does.
Well, thank you very much, Michael. Now, for business updates across the African continent, Rotus Odiri joins us. Good morning, Rotus.
Morning, Doctor. Good morning, Ayo. Good morning,
Rufai.
Good morning to all our viewers. Yeah, look, we're just focusing on Nigeria and Kenya this morning. And look, the inflation, right? It's funny how 24 hours ago we were talking about the central bank saying they want to double down on inflation, and then we get the numbers yesterday afternoon, and we've been breaking records with inflation since I think June of 2022, where we just continue to set one new record after another. So now this I think is the highest number since 2004, 2005, 22.22, which made me think of Jay-Z's 22 twos from his Reasonable Doubt album, right? So, and look, so you've got headline inflation at 22.22. Your food inflation, alarmingly, 24.61. Core inflation has breached the 20-point barrier now, and that means that for core inflation, you strip away more volatile items like food, so and you focus more on your healthcare, your education. These are things that form the backbone of spending for households. Urban inflation also climbing rural. You look at month-on-month headline inflation at 1.91% is the highest level we've seen, I think, since May of 2016. Look at food inflation at 2.13%. When you've got this type of acceleration in month-on-month inflation, it means that prices are moving rapidly in a shorter period of time as opposed to looking at year-on-year. So this is pretty alarming. And it is your cost of living is your barometer for how well your economic policies are working, because households in Nigeria are getting squeezed. Businesses are getting squeezed. Anytime a business, you go through their financial statements and they talk about the challenging economic environment, the businesses are referring to costs, the cost of doing business. Every business imports their machinery into Nigeria. They are importing inflation from other countries. So it is a really, really big problem for them. You also have an erosion of your purchasing power. You can't save, you can't invest. I think we can take a look at the impact on investments. When you look at so look, these are food shocks. Let's talk about food shocks, for example. We've talked about this. This was at the last MPC meeting. Increase in road transportation, security issues in food producing areas, legacy infrastructure. Has anyone bought a bunch of plantains recently?
Oh my God.
It is the 2,000 naira bunch is now 4,000, and the 1,000 naira bunch, the smaller one, is now 2,000. I asked the lady last time I bought, because I love plantains, and health-wise, please boil your plantains, don't fry them. I know people attack me for that because they like their dodo, right? But the lady was talking about plantains coming from Edo State, River States, rising transportation, the fact that supply is lower, those food supply shocks that you're seeing are part of the problem, right? And by the way, congratulations to Hilda Baki, right, who broke that world record. But when you do what I do and you think about costs, can you imagine the cost of what's put together to cook for 100 hours consistently? If you did a cost comparison, if she was from Senegal or she was from Gabon, compared to a Nigerian, I know that some of what was supplied to her was sponsored, but sponsorship is still a cost, right? And when you think about breaking this type of record, when food inflation is at a record high, it gives you a window into what it costs for the average restaurant in Nigeria. The average restaurant in Nigeria is not just dealing with record high food prices. The average restaurant in Nigeria is dealing with power. Think of the amount of, look at that, they are stretching there. Your labor costs, your power costs, your raw ingredients. It is really, really, really hard to get by. So we move on from that and we now look at the investments, right? It's not just your impact on your purchasing power. Look at the last Treasury bill auction that took place. The 364-day, and these are money market instruments that mature in a year or under that. 364-day T-bill is at 8.99%. Your year-on-year inflation is at 22.2%. Your real rate of return is your percentage return on your investments and savings adjusted for inflation. So you subtract 22.22 from 8.99 and you are negative 13.23, right? Now, I'm not saying people should take their money and go and put it under a mattress. I mean, you should put your money in securities that can yield some type of return. But across every metric, you are continuing to see a deterioration from investments, from in savings, from cost of living. And bless her heart, Adeso Amorowan, our State House correspondent, she gives us updates, every single thing that comes from the State House. They hardly ever talk about inflation when it comes out. Look at Michael Wilson just a few minutes ago. Food leaders in the UK are meeting Rishi Sunak to go and talk to him about how the cost of food is impacting their living. It is why you have strikes in the UK, why you have people fighting for... Here, the government, they just pretend like they're in a parallel universe and move on. Finally, in Kenya, a very interesting development here. So, the MPC. Let me quickly touch on the MPC. So what does the MPC now, the Monetary Policy Committee, do at the next meeting? They've continued to hike rates. This was the last time, 50 basis points to 18%. Since they've been hiking rates now since March or April of last year, from 11.5% to 18%. That's about, 650 basis points now. It is not working. It's not doing.
It's not the CBN's fault.
It's not exactly. It's not their fault. But now they've now put out language saying that they will continue to hike rates. They say they will double down. So you can expect rates to go up, which means cost of borrowing goes up. And most loans in Nigeria are variable rate loans, not fixed rate, which means that banks will reprice your loan upwards and it's to get more expensive. So we'll see what they do, but it's just not having an effect. So finally, Kenya, William Ruto has nominated one of his economic advisors. Should you be nominating your economic advisor to be head of the central bank? Anyway, this is Mr. Kamal Thuge. He was nominated by Ruto. He's replacing Patrick Unduroje. Unduroje's second final 4-year term ends on June 17th. As I said, he's a member of Ruto's economic advisors. He was the Treasury Principal Secretary, worked in the Treasury 2013 to 2019. He had a corruption charge. There was a corruption charge levied at him where they say he was skimming off the top and taking money from contracts, but the charges were dropped. So that's kind of like an ink blot on his resume. But again, the charges were dropped. And then he served in the IMF as a senior economist and a deputy division chief. So if Parliament approves it, then he becomes your new central bank governor of Kenya.
I mean, Rotus, I'm really happy that you said this. I'd just like to segue this conversation into the retreat they had for the governors. And I hope they are hearing this. Because amidst all of this, the governors are just so concerned about what they're going to eat.
They're like in another universe.
And that's why you see that despite the fact that they're states in the debt of over 3 trillion, they still want to take pension. Madness going on. Rotus, recently, one of the oldest companies in this country that have been here since 1923, if my memory serves me right, Unilever, stopped production of some key items of Nigerian market.
Skin cleansing and so on.
Omo, Sunlight, a couple of other detergents. Why? Cost of doing business. The cost doesn't make sense again. You know what has happened? Disposable income has been creamed off totally. 3-4 years ago, there used to be a benchmark that, okay, an average family should be able to eke a living with 150,000 naira every month.
That's been decimated now.
It's been decimated totally. 500,000 has become worthless. 1 million naira has become worthless vis-a-vis the forex challenges. The economy is in dire straits. It's in its knees as we speak today. You see, if we had true leadership, I think the leader of the country, the chef de l'État, should come out every morning and give us economic briefing.
Indeed.
Till he leaves. And the new president should also bring us economic briefing every single morning. Rotus, it has never been this bad.
Yeah.
Since return to democracy. I think the time it was this worse was between 93 and 94, where there was so much economic uncertainty that inflation numbers rose up, I think, close to 50% in this country. I remember a particular story. I had a chance, I was doing a show then, a business show, 6 a.m. in the morning on my radio station then. I interviewed a Bukwawo Shika. She told me, 93, heavily pregnant. She was starting a furniture company. She took a loan from the bank. Interest rate was over 44%.
Oh my God.
This is where we are going again in Nigeria.
Yeah.
Rotus, all the gains Olusegun Obasanjo made, this administration has killed them. Obasanjo, 28 billion loan. He came in with Paris Club forgiveness to
Wiped
2
it out.
billion.
Cleared it out, yeah.
Today, President Buhari from 7 billion loan is taking it to 41 billion. They've set Nigeria backward to where it used to be in early 2002, 2003.
That's right.
They've probably decimated the economy. Nigeria is crippled as a country that can't work. But in all of this, Rotus,
There's hope.
I see hope. I see possibility. I see the greatness.
Yeah.
I see the Nigeria that rose from a country that had over 50% inflation rate in 93, 94 to the resurgence Nigeria of the early 2000s that started growing about close to 10%. And that's why we must take leadership seriously. We have dropped the ball so much, people are suffering. There's panic in the land. There's insecurity.
Heavily.
But I see hope and I see possibility. This country will rise.
Absolutely. I mean, very true. You know, I would like to talk about the sort or the consequent, what happens when we have numbers like this, as you've said.
Yeah.
It's quite sad. Hopefully, I'm looking forward to the day you would come on the show and give us very positive numbers.
Well, so...
But again, as Rufai has mentioned, it is a matter of leadership because central bank has continue to raise basis points, but unfortunately, we haven't seen the effect of that.
Yeah.
Even with the when they talked about the Naira redesign policy and how it was going to affect inflation, we need to still revisit that because now we have a longer time to see just how much impact that has had, even though it wasn't allowed to fully flourish. But when you look at issues like this, as you mentioned, in the UK, Nigeria is not the only country in the world
facing high inflation. Right.
However, the difference between Nigeria and other countries is the way that we have responded to it, or perhaps the sense of urgency that other countries seem to have when it comes to rising inflation. The UK gives almost daily updates whenever Michael Wilson comes here. Yesterday, we had a report that they were measuring the mental health impact of the rising costs of living in the UK. And so when we think about, if we borrow a leaf from other countries who've done their research, you cannot imagine, you know, sometimes we see things play out in our society and we wonder what's going on, but we don't understand the impact of numbers like this and the reason why we must fix the economy. We talk about crime rate and how poverty in the land, how the cost of living fuels crime. It is. I mean, the evidence is there. We talk about impact on family life. We talk about quality of life. A few days ago, we were talking about the life expectancy of a Nigerian compared to their counterparts in other parts of the world. These are the things that affect us as a people. Indeed. So interpreting the numbers to your everyday life and seeing how it plays out in everyday life, it's not just about the fact that we don't have the money in our hands, it's the other effects that perhaps we need to begin to speak about.
Indeed.
And that is why we need leadership that is accountable. And I picked out I centered on Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala's speech to the governors yesterday. Because if we don't have an economy where people are prosperous, say what you will, we can't enjoy, we can't do a lot of things. People we have 30,000 naira as our current minimum wage. Rufai, you said 150,000 naira living wage. Where would that come from?
Right.
How would we achieve that? How would that be possible? So what we looking forward in terms of
4 years ago. It was a study that was done that said at least 150,000 should help Nigeria family live well 4 years ago.
Yeah, but it's not achievable.
Today,
it's gone.
But finally, I just wanted to say, looking forward, this government, irrespective of the reports and the scorecard they bring out, have failed Nigerians in respect to the economy. The future for the Tinubu-led administration is his economic policy.
Yeah.
And what we're looking forward to is perhaps a more accountable government, where we can have a government who seems to feel the pulse of the people and can take us out of this economic mess, because we cannot continue, obviously, like this.
One quick point. The subsidies, if they remove it, which I
It's
support,
not-
you are going to see a price shock. Go to Doctor, please go ahead.
Okay, let's start with Kenya.
Yeah.
Kamau Tuge.
Yeah.
Well, what President Ruto has done is to appoint an insider.
Yes.
As you showed in his profile, he's been part of the system. Master's PhD in economics from Johns Hopkins University. And, he's going to inherit from Patrick Njoroge, well, let's say mixed fortunes. The major challenge that they face in Kenya is the problem with the shilling. Their currency is in a very bad shape.
Indeed.
Okay, the foreign reserve has crashed, more or less. Inflation is also very high in Kenya. So he has a lot, for him to worry about when he takes over from Njoroge, who has completed 2 terms, serving under 2 presidents. And, okay, it remains to be seen how this new central bank governor deals with those key monetary issues and helps, to move Kenya economy forward. Well, I hope congratulations will be in order to him.
Right.
Because being CBN governor, being central bank governor of Kenya is quite like the peak
Of course.
for him in career-wise.
Yeah.
Now, as for Nigeria, yes, things have gone from really bad to worse. Inflation figures have been rising consecutively for the past 4 months. It's now at the highest point in 19 years at 22.22%. What is the effect of inflation, as we can see? It means that, look, our lifestyles have been jeopardized. Food inflation at 24.61 will have the effect of the promotion of hunger, poverty, malnutrition. You talked about investments. Of course, returns on investments will be terribly affected also.
Yes.
Now, in Nigeria, we can't even be talking about this 2% that we talk about when we discuss European and American economies.
Yes.
Nobody can put a peg at it because it's galloping inflation. But you can just measure it in terms of the despair that we all face. And the fear is that it will get worse.
Indeed.
And once it gets worse, the pandemic of empty pockets will further prevail. Okay, what do we do? The analysts have said, what is open to the central bank is to further increase rates. But as we have seen, these rate hikes have not worked.
Correct.
So why is it that the perpetual increase in rates, when MPC meets, they will come out. They say, the only option now is that we increase, monetary policy rates and all of that. But we have not seen any effect. Those are the fundamentals that we need to be addressed. And you talked about subsidy removal. Yes, even the World Bank representative chief in Nigeria was saying yesterday, only yesterday, I think at the governor's induction event, that look, if Nigeria does not remove fuel subsidy within 2 to 3 months, the government will be on its knees. And we will have to go back to ways and means.
Right.
So, and that's why I say, and when you add that to the crisis of inflation, the future is as bleak as it is in Turkey.
Indeed.
That is going to have the Sultan return to power. So while we talk about other people, we are also in very serious trouble here.
Indeed.
So that's just the truth of the matter.
It is. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Rutus.